Hello everyone, good evening. Thank you for coming to the meeting and we shall kick off. So Callum, going through the agenda.
Yep.
So apologies.
Yep, thank you, Chair. Apologies from councillors Norman Jorgensen, Pauline Jorgensen and Chris Johnson, and subbing them this evening are councillors Chris Bowering, Abdul Loys and Rochelle Shepherd-Debay.
Thank you. We have the minutes of the previous meeting. Any comments from the minutes of the previous meeting? Laura.
Thank you. I have two comments. I know last meeting I raised that the bus strategy should probably be discussed as priority and we all agreed, but I see it's not on the agenda and it seems being pushed to September.
So, yeah, thank you, Laura. Having discussed that with the officers, so the Assistant Director for Highways and with the officer that deals with the bus strategy, and sort of looking at workload requirements and when it would actually be most useful for Scrutiny to get the update, September sort of fit the bill for all of those requirements. So that was based on the advice of the officers in terms of when it would be most appropriate to receive that update.
I know that Steve Moore, the Director of Service, said it was one of his main concerns and advised that maybe we look at it because, as I understand, the Department of Transport's subsidy is ending in September, so it seems too late to really discuss them. And that's why I wanted to raise it now. I don't know if that was raised with the chairman at all or if it's news to him that it's not on.
Right, I wasn't aware of that. I knew that it was going to be coming along to this meeting, but I wasn't aware of those timescales of what you've just specifically said. So I can't really comment on that.
No. Andy, I see you're on the call. I don't know if you've got an update for members about buses.
Not especially, other than to say that the bus service improvement plan and the enhanced partnership were what was coming here in advance of us making decisions to adopt them to executive. And the enhanced partnership is going, I think, I'm not sure, I can't remember the exact dates now, but it isn't yet gone. And there isn't anything other than what's been already adopted in terms of the bus service improvement plan, which is adopted already. Wasn't aware that we were supposed to be bringing any further update to this meeting.
Could I propose, Chairman, that when there's an important strategy that is priority to all of us and our residents, that the officers raise it with you, so it's not a surprise to any of us at this meeting? And second of all, sorry, I had a second one. I haven't been on one of these committees for a while, and when I was on them, whenever there was a question raised, it'd always be attributed to the councillor in the minutes, and at the moment it doesn't have any councillor questions associated to particular councillors. If it could just be put in the future. Does that make sense, Callum?
Answer again. Yep. Yes, this was raised last year and it was actually taken to the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, where it was resolved that members wouldn't be named in Scrutiny Committee meetings. So we're just following through on what was agreed by the committee at the time. If members wish to change that, I suppose it would just need to go to the Management Committee for sort of to reverse that decision as such.
Could I just say something on the subject of the bus thing, if that's
Yep,
all right?
surely.
Yeah, I do agree with Laura that Steve particularly spoke about buses as being a priority, and you know, maybe September is a bit leaving it too late, and I wonder whether we could get somebody perhaps say something on from the My Journey team, who presumably would have been having conversations with Reading Buses. I mean, I've had conversations with the CEO of Reading Buses recently about buses into my area, and there are some concerns that some routes are going to become not as viable as they have been because bus usage is down. And if you think about it, you know, if someone's working from home one day a week and they used to go on the bus, that's a 20%, you know, loss of customers. And if that's happening in quite a lot of cases, then some of the buses that we rely upon are going to be under threat. And I know it does concern me greatly. That
Okay, so we'll take that one on board. We'll go back to the officers, Andy. Oh, sorry, Andy. And then come back with information of what's going on, and then we can actually discuss, do we want to get together in August to take this forward? Yeah, okay, Andy.
I'll go away, have a chat with Rebecca Brooks in the CTU team and Paul to discuss when would be a pertinent time to when we're going to take some decisions about buses that would be wise to bring it back here beforehand. I think it's more, I'm not sure that the timing of August would fit. I think September's probably still, in my mind, still quite a good fit. But I probably need to check that with Paul and the team. I'll come back to you.
Sorry, Chair.
I had Rochelle first.
How much money was actually allocated in the medium-term financial plan for buses, for bus support?
Andy, do you know that?
I'm assuming that's a question for me, Rochelle.
Yes.
I haven't got that figure off the top of my head. I think what you mean is how much money is in our revenue budgets for bus support, don't you, rather than in the medium-term financial plan?
Okay, well, can you tell me about that then?
I haven't got the exact figure. I can bring it back to the chair as a post the meeting. It's better than me guessing what it is. I had a feeling it was around £800,000, Rochelle, but I will make the figure available to the chair after this meeting.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Gregor.
Can I ask that any information or any decisions that need to be made in relation to buses come to this committee before any papers are sent to the executive briefing, in order to make sure that we can comment on them and scrutinise them before they go forward to the decision-making body that will make a decision on them based on whether or not we've seen them or not.
That sounds reasonable to me.
Just on that, Gregor, just to let members know, there is an urgent individual executive member decision, I believe, next Wednesday. So that obviously, just to make you aware, I mean, you are aware, but there won't be an opportunity to bring that here prior to that decision being made. So I just thought I'd raise that now.
What is that decision?
Yeah, specifically Wokingham Town, it's the re-procurement of those services.
In principle, we agree with what you're saying there, Gregor.
Yeah, it's just to make sure it comes before the executive briefing rather than before the executive, because the papers between the executive briefing and the executive tend to be the same.
Okay. Right. Anything else on the minutes? No. Okay. So who would like to propose them? Right, declaration of interest. Any declarations of interest? Received any? No, no declarations of interest. Public questions? None received. None received. Member question time? None received, Chair. None received. Okay, so we move on to the first major topic here, the Community Safety Partnership Update. So pass this over to Narinda.
Hi, good evening, everybody. I'm Narinda Borough, I'm the Community Safety Manager for the Borough, and I will talk you through the report that's been circulated in your pack. So I'll take you over the item just briefly, and then I'll move into questions. So the Community Safety Partnership report. So the report with respect to yourself, the recommendation is that the committee considers the update provided in the bundle and on crime and disorder, and offers comment with respect to the information. So the Community Safety Partnership, we bring an annual end of year report as we're required to do every year, and this is part of that reporting. It includes a quantitative and qualitative summary of the Community Safety Partnership's outputs for the year, and also gives information about the end of year crime statistics and crime data as a bundle of 12 sort of main core indicators that give a direction of travel with respect to crime and disorder in the borough. So the Community Safety Partnership for Wokingham is made of strategic statutory partners, including health, police, fire, and other key members that are included in the Act. And the aims, the overarching duty is for us to reduce crime and disorder, improve community safety in the borough, and to work on reducing reoffending together with our probation colleagues who lead on that particular area of the work stream. So by addressing these three overarching outcomes, the partnership looks to improve the quality of the life for residents and for businesses and any visitors into the borough. So our strategic priorities were set as part of the strategy that we agreed in June 2021. So this year, the report covers the first year of that strategy and what we've delivered as part of those priorities. The priorities for the partnership, the strategic priorities, were listening to the needs and concerns of local residents, intervening early and preventing issues escalating, and then working together to protect vulnerable residents from harm. And then the specific aims underneath that were to work with communities to deal with crime and disorder and antisocial behaviour hotspots, reduce harm caused by domestic abuse, reduce incidents of serious violence and knife crime, tackle exploitation of children, young people and vulnerable adults, and also to reduce incidents of residential burglary and theft from a vehicle. So there's information within the report about our strategic context in terms of how we fit on a Thames Valley in terms of on a Thames Valley framework, in terms of the Community Safety Partnership, where we sit within the PCC's structure, the Police and Crime Commissioner structure, and also where we sit within the public health sort of outcomes framework. This year, the partnership was chaired by Susan Parsonage, who took over from Felicity Parker, who was our previous local police area commander, and was supported by the executive member, Bill Soane. So in terms of the partnership's sort of key achievements within the report, there's some main 4 subsections setting out sort of the areas that we've delivered in terms of, firstly, domestic abuse. So our key achievements in terms of domestic abuse have been to set our policy for domestic abuse for the borough, which covers the period that aligns with Community Safety Partnership strategy, which is useful, 2021 and 24, and covers all the things that were required for us to do as part of the Domestic Abuse Act that came down in 2021. We commissioned a new domestic abuse contract and support service, and we've delivered over 28 multiple and single agency training sessions involving over 20 different organisations, with over 1,200 people attending those training sessions. So huge amounts of training being conducted in terms of domestic abuse, and you'll see other types of training that the partnership are involved in throughout the different work streams that we're delivering. Moving on then, I'm not going to read each and every part of the section, but just to give members a flavour, really, to give the committee a flavour. In terms of prevent and channel, we have completed a quite detailed and granular review in terms of our prevent duty, and we've had a look at our compliance structures, we've had a look at our action and training plan, and we've also looked at our communications plan and delivered within those plans in terms of different partner agencies, getting organisations up to speed, getting training delivered, and making sure that our policies and procedures in terms of prevent and channel are absolutely in line with good practice, and we're delivering that work to a high and top quality standard in terms of delivery on channel and prevent. Substance misuse, we have also commissioned a new service last year for substance misuse. And within that, we've also issued, in terms of substance misuse, we've also issued over 500 naloxone kits to users and partner agencies to harm minimise and to reduce drug-related deaths within the borough. We've delivered awareness workshops to over 800 students. We supported lots of young people with substance misuse issues. In fact, 91 young people. And over 500 adults have been supported through the service. So quite high numbers of users coming through, service users coming through on the service. We've also set up support services around family members and their loved ones. And we've established an on-site hepatitis C treatment clinic for clients being able to get help with Hep C on site. Moving on to antisocial behaviour then, we have on top of, and this doesn't include the work of the safety and enforcement team, which is to an aside, so this is over and above the work already being conducted by the safety and enforcement team. We've delivered a borough-wide multi-agency antisocial behaviour panel that takes some of the most high-risk and complex cases from across the borough, including cases from housing associations and referrals in from other partner agencies such as the police, and also private residents referring in around ongoing and complex issues that they're experiencing in terms of antisocial behaviour. We have also attended a number of neighbourhood action groups in terms of antisocial behaviour and supported, of course, Thames Valley Police in issuing a number of Section 59 warnings in relation to antisocial driving and car cruising throughout the borough. And we've currently got a PSPO consultation, so a public space protection order consultation in place in relation to stopping and prohibiting the car cruising issue that's been an issue for the borough over the last couple of years or so. Then we've got some information around the housing ASB and some statistics around what housing antisocial behaviour, the key highlights have been with that service. And then we've got some information in the report for serious violence and exploitation. Serious violence and exploitation has come down as a duty for us as a community safety partnership to reduce serious violence and exploitation. And that means in the key in the main, it means for us to work with other key partners, including our statutory partners already named in the Community Safety Partnership, to reduce the prevalence and harm caused by knives and other weapons and guns and gang related activity in relation to young people. That works in its early phases, and we will be developing that as the strategy goes through from this year onwards onto 2024. And then in terms of violence against women and girls, there's sort of a paragraph in there, again, in terms of our work on violence against women and girls, that is very much in the work plan for the next 2-3 years of the strategy. So this year we'll be working on making large inroads on the violence against women and girls. Of course, domestic abuse is one pillar of the wider domestic abuse, is a pillar of the violence against women and girls agenda, but there are other plans in train in terms of undertaking that work. There's a summary table on page 26 of the papers that outlines what our sort of change position in terms of crime overall across the borough looks like. And you'll note that this year we've had an increase of 10.9%, and that's 736 actual crimes and offences for the borough. So we've seen an increase. And I have to say that's probably an expected increase, if I'm honest. The last 2 years have been over lockdown and COVID have been, we've seen dipped and reduced crime levels across the borough, across the southeast, and also nationally. So that increase was expected in terms of the numbers we were looking to report on at the end of the year. The report then goes on to outline the partnership governance and structure. So it's easy for the committee to see sort of the number of delivery groups that are involved in delivering some of that work that I've just outlined, and is contained in the body of the report. And we have over 8 delivery groups and subgroups of the Community Safety Partnership Board, which is the strategic board delivering on all of that work sort of outlined. The community safety team has grown throughout 2021-22. We've had a 0.2, it's grown, but only so slightly. So we've had a 0.2 post and also a 0.5 post. So not even one full-time post, but that's been supported by some serious violent crime funding that's come down from the Home Office in terms of supporting that serious violence duty that's come down the line. And then we were also supported not only through a grant with the PCC's office that we do receive year on year, but also by money that was drawn down to help us deliver on the domestic abuse duties grant to deliver the work on domestic abuse. And that is the end of the report. I'm happy to take questions.
Okay, so what I'll do, I'll go with Shirley. I see Laura and Gregor, David, Chris, Rochelle. Okay, so we'll start with Shirley, David, Laura, Gregor, Chris, Rochelle.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Narinda. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions. I was reading through last year's report to make comparisons to this year, and on the substance misuse and abuse, I said last year that there was a new contract in place which had attracted additional funding, and it was a specific service for young people called Here For You. And I don't see that mentioned at all this year under that name. And I just wondered whether the funding for that continued, or has it been absorbed into something else? So that's one question. Also last year, under the antisocial behaviour in council owned properties, you also alluded to trying to engage with housing associations because they were not unsurprisingly, I have to say, not providing the same kind of service about antisocial behaviour as we were with our council houses. And there seems to be no mention this year of any liaison with housing associations onto that subject. And hate crime, which I notice is up by 9%, 37 more reported hate crimes. I know last year you were saying that there was a move to try and encourage more reporting of that. So I'm hoping that increase is to do with the fact that more people are reporting, that are aware when they've been subjected to hate crime, and they're now reporting that. But it would be useful to know that. And just one other thing under prevent, which I've just suddenly thought of that I didn't write down. Do we have any measures of the success of the prevent programme in terms of how many people perhaps are in danger of being radicalised and are being steered away from that particular course? Are there any figures that we could look at, or is that something that is kind of a bit top secret? I don't know. Thank you.
Narinda.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. So I'll take the last question first, I think, because that's probably the easiest one. So in short, I'm afraid, yes, it is sort of still a bit top secret is the sort of phrase round them. The Home Office is very careful with the information that we both record and send and circulate in terms of the numbers of people coming through the prevent programme. I think it has some context and some background just really for footing in counter-terrorism sort of legislation in terms of just being part of that very sort of secretive information keeping around it. In terms of transparency, we can certainly, speak around sanitised cases, and we provide a case update both to the prevent board locally and also a cases update to the CSP board. So there is certainly information shared around the types of risks that we are facing and the types of risks that we are actively de-escalating locally. And they have increased in their width and breadth in terms of the types of risks that were primarily dealt with by this programme at the beginning. So at the beginning, I think there was a very narrow focus of the programme, and now the focus has expanded. So we are looking at more right-wing terrorism. We are also looking at cybercrime and cyber influences as well. And we're looking at influences through gaming as well, which has really changed the way the programme is being delivered and changes the way that we have to think about how awareness and education programmes are also delivered for prevent and education. So that's sort of a little bit about the prevent. In terms of hate crime, yes, we are encouraging reporting of hate crime. We are reporting that, we are increasing that or encouraging that both with our police colleagues, but also with our voluntary sector colleagues, actively trying to push third-party reporting mechanisms. So we want to make it easier for people to report hate crimes, both in the borough but also wider, because people that are victims of hate crime may not and often don't want to involve the police because for a number of different reasons, distrust of the police, not wanting to give a statement, so on and so forth. But actually what is important for us is to actually ensure that we've got that temperature check on what the community feel and what is actually going on out there. And I think we are still a long way off from understanding that in the borough because we don't have as many well-established third-party reporting receptacles as we could have, such as in community hubs, in places of worship, in even at the council front desk, actually. So there are a number of different places where we could make that sort of easier to happen and more anonymous. But unfortunately, hate crime, I have to say, so hate crime in the borough is both on the rise, but we've seen a 5-year increase. So we've now seen an increase for the 6 years, actually, incrementally on an upward trajectory for hate crime. And that's both a borough-wide trend, but also a trend for the southeast and also nationally. So sadly, that for us in Wokingham, the two areas of hate crime that are of most concern are racially and religiously aggravated crimes and also disability hate crime. So those are our two key issues for the borough. ASB and housing associations, yes, it was a little bit light touch in terms of what we popped in the report this time. I think what we have at the moment is very good working relationships, now well-established ones with the borough, with housing associations. The issue we have with housing associations really is that the constant churn of staff and trying to ensure that we've got those linkages and we're clear about individuals that are responsible for properties still remains a challenge for us. But in terms of that relationship with the housing associations and also knowing what properties belong to who, we are much better at. And we also think that tenants of housing associations, whilst not getting as good a service as they do if you were a WBC housing tenant, I have to admit, they are getting a better service than they did perhaps last year and the year before, simply because we now know how to escalate the issue and where to take it. So that's improved greatly, and that's probably why we just gave it a light touch report mention in the report this time, if not sort of omitted it from information completely. And then lastly, your Here For You question. The Here For You service is the young people's specific service that sits within the youth offending team at the moment. So absolutely, that service is continued. The funding for that did not get reused for anything else. The funding is still there and still enhancing the service. And I think I mentioned in the report that we have supported, or the service has supported, around 91 young people for this year alone. So that's a new addition. 91 new young people are receiving support that didn't previously, and that will continue because we know the substance misuse is the gateway to a lot of other wider issues and concerns. And if we can assist with that at a very early stage, then that's a good move. Thank you. Sorry for the background noise. I think my husband's decided he wants to be domesticated this evening, so sorry if you're picking that up.
Thank you. Could I ask a really quick follow up on the Here For You service? How does that get advertised to young people? How do they find out about that?
So there's a number of different ways that we advertise it directly. So if you come into contact with the youth offending team, that is one way. It's advertised via schools. So there is a service that goes into the schools and does general awareness and what we call the old tier 1 sort of low level early intervention and prevention information talk. So the service is promoted that way, and we also promote on social media and other outlets to young people through that way as well. So a number of different sources in terms of promotion, and also through referrals with other health related services, so GPs and other wider health related CAMS services is also referring in.
Sorry, just one other question on that, if you don't mind. So do you promote, is there a way of parents accessing that knowledge about the Here For You service? Because I think sometimes parents have concerns about their children and they don't know how to discuss them with the child, and that, it seems to me, might be a way that they could facilitate that.
The information is available for parents, and there is obviously some work that we're also pushing out in terms of parents, because the other thing that we found in terms of some of the research and the information that was coming forward to us from parents is that they often will find they're picking up on phrases, languages, they're picking up on drug paraphernalia. They're not quite sure what it is, what it's used for, or what you do with it, but they know that it's not, that there's something that they should be worried about. So yes, we are targeting some information for parents as well, and also sort of signposting parents about where they can go for additional information if they would like that, and then how to make a referral, how to have a chat with someone about something, or a young person that they might be concerned about.
Abdul, were you going to ask about this specific topic?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
Hi, good evening. Thank you, Shally. I think you picked up some of the questions which I wanted to say. Despite, I did hear what you exactly said, but word prevent means simply to BME committees, just like you are highlighting to Muslim community, for example. That's how the feelings outside are. My question is, the authority identified gaps analyzed against 2020 channel guidance with RAG status. What is RAG status, and where is the implementation of training to, you mentioned about local schools, secondary schools, and our officers, or we as where is that training coming from, and who will be leading that? Thank you, Linda.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think there is a clear recognition that the word prevent and the actual prevent programme causes lots of mixed feelings around different communities, and that is in particular to those of the Islamic faith and Muslim communities find it particularly upsetting and previously have done. We are actively locally going out to the ref, and we are going out to communities locally specifically, and I'll be happy to talk about and be directed in terms of any additional work that we can do with communities in terms of ensuring that we are clear that for Wokingham, prevent and channel, and both Wokingham and nationally, has a much wider remit than targeting and or looking at just crimes that are in relation to, or radicalisation, which is in relation to that connected to Muslim or Islamic faiths or backgrounds. That is not, and I realise that has some historic context behind it, and those feelings, I absolutely do understand that. But the prevent agenda and channel has come a long way since then. In fact, last year and the year before, actually, I don't know about the year, I don't know about last year actually, but definitely the year before, right-wing referrals into Prevent and Channel on a national level outstripped any other type of referrals that were being made into the Prevent and Channel programme space. So that just sort of goes to show that that is where the sort of Prevent and Channel workspace is. It's also, we have mixed mixed ideologies and mixed information coming forward for people that are just confused, and the programme is really to try and address some of those confusions within communities and confusions within particular individuals that might just be upset by a number of different things, not just in relation to radicalisation of a particular sort. So happy to accept any additional focus or any additional communities that you think we should be reaching out to that we haven't engaged with, in terms of, you know, the types of messaging. We want to get the messaging absolutely right for communities when we're putting it out, because you know, we feel that's really of high importance. The training plan has we've got a tiered training plan which has a look at the number of different professionals in the borough and individuals. So we have those that just need sort of tier 1 basic training around Prevent and should be aware of the safeguarding responsibilities around Prevent and Channel. And then we have sort of a tiered programme that goes right down to individual professionals, social workers and others that should be really concentrating on very detailed, granular training information around Prevent. So I'm happy to share that more granular, detailed information for committee members around training if they would find that beneficial. And the person leading on the Prevent training and in the Prevent space is a member of my team called Zoe Hannam. And Zoe works both for the Prevent programme over Prevent and Channel over in Reading, and also works for our Prevent programme and Channel in Wokingham.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move on to David, Chris, Laura, Gregor and Rochelle, and then yeah, we'll take it from there. So I want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question.
Hi, thank you. Being fairly new to this, I'm quite impressed by the amount of information that you've provided for the committee. I've struggled a little bit to get a sense of, so where are we going with all of this? I refer back to your specific aims at the start of the report, where you list the 5 there. And then when we look at the crime figures or the crime performance summary, I mean, taking one of them, we had a specific aim to reduce serious violence and knife crime, but violence with injury has gone up by 22.7%. In fairness, I could also point out that antisocial behaviour, which was also a specific aim, has come down. I'm interested in 2 things, in fact 3. Firstly, what is your sense of where you are in delivering on those specific aims? Secondly, it would be interesting to see some long-term trends and data behind that. We're comparing 20 to 21, and those are very peculiar years because of the pandemic and many other things. So what's the longer term trend than that? And on the third point, in the narrative, you talk about domestic abuse and rape numbers going up, but that's possibly due to the impact of media coverage encouraging people to come forward and report these things, which is as it should be. But if that's an area for action in the future, as I think you mentioned, then where are we taking as a baseline? How do we know we're actually having an impact on that?
Yes, thank you. So the long-term trends, we can certainly, for future reports, I can make a concerted effort in terms of producing some longer-term trends to give you some trend information. I've made a note of that. And you're quite right, the 2 years that we were looking at there in the year before are very peculiar years. So we had very low crime rates, unusually low crime rates, but for a number of different reasons. So happy to provide those in future reports that we pull together to try and make that a little bit more contextual in terms of the sort of 2, 3, 4, 5 year information. In terms of where we are heading in terms of our strategic aims, I think the partnership is in a really good place. We have over the last 3 years built the community safety plan, partnership and team up from a place where it was doing quite poorly, if I'm honest, in terms of both its strategic footing, but also its operational footing as well. We have very strong leadership within the partnership. So Susan Parsonage is the chair. The deputy chair is the local police area superintendent or commander for the borough. So well placed and well resourced to be able to actually put some boots on the ground, as it were, in terms of resourcing and ensuring that sort of joined up approach to the policing and sort of strategic approaches in place. And I think in terms of some of our aims also, violence against women and girls is a very high strategic priority, both nationally and locally for us. This year, the police launched its Violence Against Women and Girls Thames Valley action plan. We locally are not far behind the curve on that in terms of launching our Violence Against Women and Girls action plan to follow. And that will help us deliver some of the wider domestic abuse plans that we have. We're also in a fantastic place as a borough in terms of our antisocial behaviour response. We've got a 10 personnel strong team in terms of the new antisocial behaviour response, 24 response team, so 7 days a week service. And that's made a real huge impact into our response on the ground to be able to deliver on some of the things that are contained within the strategic documents and the action plans. So I'm sure you all agree that strategic plans and action plans are really good, and they're really great to have fantastic evidence-based information in plans. But sort of if the response is lacking in terms of when the public pick up the phone and want a response for an antisocial behaviour issue, a neighbour dispute, something that the police are not resourced to attend, then we kind of fall apart at the seams. So since the 1st of April, we've had that in place. So we are heading in absolutely the right direction. This is the first year of delivery on a 3-year plan. We've got 2 more years to make some really good additional outcomes within that, and so we're absolutely headed in the right direction, and we've got sort of a head of steam built up in terms of the leadership and absolutely knowing sort of what the plans are and being supportive in terms of resources and delivery behind it as well. So that's the longer terms, and then where are we heading? Strategic aims. And I missed the last. I've forgotten what the last question was.
The last question was in terms of the metrics that you use,
Oh, yes.
and I will come back on a point you've made there, if I may. I talked about the reporting of domestic abuse and rape may be increasing because of increased media coverage and people more willing to come forward. And therefore, I was interested to know what you'd use as a baseline for improvement in the future. But just coming back on the comments you just made, if I may, the one specific aim that you stated that has come down is when you alluded to, which is antisocial behaviour. But given the level of activity that you've described, and I've no doubt about the efficacy of teams and processes, are we actually going to see, or are you expecting to see some hard results and these numbers improving against those 5 key aims in the next 12 months?
Absolutely. I think so. Our response as a borough was very lacking around sort of antisocial behaviour in terms of definitely out of hours, but also sort of our response. We had 1 officer dealing with all things to do with antisocial behaviour, and now we've got, like I said, a 10 personnel strong responsive service that can often be where it needs to be, where the phone call is made from within an hour, if not 2. To be able to deal with things. So I think to begin with, we're likely to see an increase in the figures reported and us recording, as often is the case, because I think to date our reporting and the reporting levels have been quite low, where the confidence in the public has been quite low. I'm not going to report it because nothing happens, nobody comes out, and there is no response sort of attitude can be often the evidence behind that. And I have heard that, had heard that a number of times locally. And so what I predict to see is an increase in those antisocial behaviour figures, actually, if I'm honest, because as people realise that they will get a response, the demand for the service will increase, and as will our sort of reporting ability and our recording of those incidents as well. So we'll get better at recording it. And then I think once we're in for a year or second year into the service, we'll be able to actually see where the level is for antisocial behaviour and what kind of impact we're making on it. But absolutely, I can say anecdotally from the ground, in terms of the service that the residents are now receiving, we've got a service that is commended across the Thames Valley. In fact, we were at the PCC, we were at a meeting with the PCC's office this afternoon with all of the other community safety managers across the whole of the Thames Valley, where Ed Shader came and we gave a good practice presentation to the whole of the Thames Valley about the model that Wokingham is now using to tackle antisocial behaviour. So that's around that. The other thing about baseline for rape and sexual offences, in terms of rape and sexual offences, that very much in terms of having a look at the evidence base of that, we will be looking at that longer term trends and longer term information when we pull together the violence against women and girls strategy and action plan for the borough. Our levels are low, but the thing that we need to understand is, are our levels low because there is low victim confidence in reporting and what happens, or are our levels genuinely low, which is the case across the board for most of Wokingham's crimes. So Wokingham, as we know, is a very, very low crime and low antisocial behaviour area. But like I said, in terms of victim-based crimes, so those that are sexual crimes, for example, and rape, is that level also low? And we need to do some work with victims and to understand that. Nationally speaking, crime and crimes around sexual violence in particular are in a very, very bad place. So nationally, victims' confidence, the ability to take perpetrators to court, the ability to get an outcome, anything less than 600 days in court. So it takes from a victim reporting to an actual disposal being undertaken, anything around on average 600 days. So we're having a large number of victims falling out of the system because nobody wants to be involved in a process that takes anything up to 600 days. So there's but there's a number of different agencies, criminal justice, CPS and the police all involved in and the court system all involved in that. So that's a really long-winded answer, but I hope it gives you some more context around the sort of work that we have to do to get underneath understanding some of this a bit better locally for us.
Okay, I'm going to pass over to Chris. If we could sort of keep the verbosity down a bit, be a bit helpful.
Thank you. I think what we need to do is to try to find out how effective the policies are. I think if we can't do that, it's very difficult to make much progress. But that's in conjunction, unfortunately, with general things that are going on in the population. It's a bit like swimming in a fast-running river and trying to work out how fast you're swimming by looking at the bank. It's difficult. So there's two things which I wonder could have been done or can be done to give us a better idea generally. And that would be to put in local trends, or national trends or local trends, whether that's South East England or Berkshire, for some or maybe all of these statistics. And the other problem, which has already been alluded to, is the problem we've got the pandemic here. I think it would have been much more valuable if we'd had 2019 to 20 and regard 20 to 21 as an anomaly. I think with those two comparisons, we might be able to sift out what the real progress we are making with these policies, because you can't directly tell from whether something's going up or down, whether the policy is doing well or not.
Yes, I note that. So what I can do is for like I said, in future reports, provide more of a trend around a 3 and a 5 year, 3, 5 and maybe 1 year. We can have a look at providing that, and that gives that information, I think, a bit more meaning.
Thank you. Thank you. Laura.
Thank you, Narinda. For the next time this comes back to scrutiny, can we either have in table or graph format, obviously the long-term trends which we've discussed, but also how we're doing compared to other authorities, and also how many of these crimes have been solved as well. Because at the moment we're only looking at one end of the service of crimes, but a lot of the time when we talk to our residents, they're more concerned with the actual success rate of these crimes being solved. So I think having that information in front of us will be really useful from a scrutiny point of view.
I'm happy to add the detections rate for the crimes where they're available.
Thank you, Narinda. I'd echo the point that David made earlier around the increase in domestic abuse recorded incidents. While it is dreadful that any number of reports of domestic abuse have been made, it's actually positive news that more people are coming forward and reporting them. And actually, we should be strangely setting ourselves targets to get higher reporting so that we get to a point where 100% of these crimes are reported in our borough. How we get to that, I don't know, but I wanted to make that point. I wanted to ask, my first question is, why is fraud excluded from this list?
The fraud is excluded from the list because it's dealt with by action fraud, which is a separate entity for dealing with fraud offences. So whilst closely connected with the police, actually fraud investigations and fraud incidents are recorded separately and dealt with separately by specialist officers because of the very often complex national, international and global issues and complexities around fraud. And also, if I'm honest, it's such a complex crime per se. It requires some more detailed investigations around it. So those figures have been extracted for some years now from the general all crime stats.
So I asked the question about fraud for a very personal reason. I've spent the vast majority of this year trying to help my 82-year-old uncle get back £178,000 that he had stolen from him, which if his council, not this one, but if his council had done a better job, wouldn't have happened. We are an affluent borough. We have an ageing population and we have an increase in vulnerable people as a direct result of COVID. To have a community safety partnership, in my view, that is not taking action against some of the types of fraud that directly affect our residents and will continue to affect our residents long into the future, if we don't have a plan for that, and we're not working on that, I think we are doing our residents a disservice. And I'm speaking specifically about identity fraud, fraud against the vulnerable, cyber fraud, small business fraud, and cyber attacks against small businesses, which I will remind you, last year, our own council was a victim of a cyber attack. So while I appreciate it's not in this report, and I appreciate that you have a reason for it not to be in this report, I do think it is something that we as a council should have a plan for, specifically the areas that I've referenced. I think it is something that we need to have an urgent look at, because I can say quite clearly and with a degree of certainty that if we'd done more, or if my uncle's council had done more, he wouldn't have been in the situation that he was in. I would also say that a lot of the successes that are referenced earlier on in this document are related to things like communications, engagement, attending NAG meetings. These are all things that we as a council can control. Some of these things, when I was exec member for communications, I know that the comms team did communication around, but I think we need to do a lot more, and I think we need a specific strategy for the types of fraud that I referenced.
So just to come back on that point, we have, as a partnership, made some funding available to our trading standards colleagues who are still within our joint contract as part of PPP. We have some very, very good and close work being undertaken by those trading standards colleagues who are working on exactly that list, Gregor, that you said there, in terms of protecting those vulnerable people, ensuring that their money is safe, ensuring they are safe online in terms of cyber attacks and cyber crimes. So I am happy to provide some more detail to the committee, either via circulation or via a separate agenda item just on this fraud and action fraud and what we're doing as a partnership, because there is work underway and it isn't detailed specifically in that report in great detail. I take that, but there is joint partnership work currently being undertaken, and we are strengthening that by putting additional funding in, because we realise it's under-resourced and an issue and a priority for the borough. So happy to take your direction. I can either put something round via email to the members or come back at a later date.
Mr. Chairman, can I request that we have a formal presentation at this meeting as soon as is feasible and can be slotted into the agenda, please?
Let's bring that up at the when we're looking at the future plan. Just following on from Gregor's point, I'm just looking at the cost benefit analysis of the fraud in terms of how many, this is asking for specific data, how many instances of fraud and cybercrime have we had in comparison to see the size of the problem?
Again, I can circulate those figures. I don't have them to hand, but I'm happy to circulate those, or like I said, bring them as part of the detailed update.
Yeah, because I think what I'd like to do is actually see the size of the problem before we actually make it an agenda item. If it's just one or two people, then that's a point issue we have to deal with. If it's like hundreds of people or whatever, then it's something that we actually need to narrow down on. So I think we need to see the size of the problem and then make a decision. So that's going to be based upon Dorinda's information. But if you could get that to us sooner rather than later, that'd be great. Then we can make a decision.
I can, Chairman, I can say it's not one or two people. It is in the hundreds, but you know, I don't have the numbers specifically to date, but it isn't one or two. We are talking, you know, hundreds of victims a year on this borough alone.
Okay, that sounds good enough to have an agenda item then.
Thank you. Is that going to include vulnerable people living in our borough by themselves and look after by the carers? Because I'm coming from, I work on John Radcliffe hospitals, and I see a lot of people are complaining in Oxfordshire. So I don't know what's happening in Wokingham, but Wokingham have a greater number of people living like that. So if you could add that, in terms of fraud, it's getting bigger, but if you could add that, I would be grateful. Thank you.
Did you get that, Narinda? Comparison with other boroughs?
Comparison with other boroughs, yeah.
Yeah, and with carers as well. Yeah. No. Rochelle.
You've spoken about domestic abuse. I'm assuming you're talking about partners. What about children in domestic abuse situations, especially LGBT children who are rather stuck in a location with their parents who may not agree with their sexual orientation? And I do approve of the fact that the government has eliminated lesbian and gay conversion therapies, but they have not eliminated trans therapy. So the trans suicide rate is fairly high. What is being done by the borough to help with this? And I've got another area to go on as well. You've also talked about victims are to be believed, not blamed, treated with dignity and respect, and supported to feel safe. Now the question is, how is that measured? I can tell you that based on personal experience and friends' experience of trying to report any kind of violence against women and girls, the police have been rather less than helpful, and actually in some cases being obnoxious. Now, I can't say that's happening presently. I can say that previously that was definitely the truth, but how are they going to measure this? So the two questions, like I said, are what's being done to help LGBT children in homes where they're being abused because of their orientation or sexual identity.
Can I ask Chairman to put that round, Councillor, to put that round via a written response, so I can give you a comprehensive update?
Okay, and the second one is, how are they actually measuring whether the police are treating the victims, believing them, not blaming them, treating them with dignity and respect, etc.? Is there a program where they're recording some of these things and somebody's looking at this to see whether they actually are doing this? Or how are they going to measure this in any way, shape, or form? If it's just, oh, it seems to be fine, which seemed to be what it was doing before, when people did complain about not being believed, with being treated with less than dignity. And everybody, when they complained about it, it was all, oh, no, it's fine, it's not a problem. They just put it under the rug and left it there and hoped it would go away.
Yeah. So there's a number of different ways that sort of quality control around officers' response is being undertaken. One is the dip sampling of body footage around incidents. The other is around positive action for positive action in terms of officers and the types of responses that they must give as a police force to victims and the reports that they're making. So that is absolutely clear in terms of what is expected. And then for the victims' reassurance, if they are concerned about the type of response and they're not happy with the response, there's a number of different ways in which they can either raise that, escalate it. They can ask a more senior officer to have a look at the report, the body footage, body-worn footage of reports and incidents that are made. And also there is, of course, and whilst we don't advocate, there is that avenue if and when needed for complaints, formal complaints against officers when that's required. There's also the independent advisory group for the police in terms of individuals being involved, and individual representations from different groups are more than welcome upon that group. And also, if there are concerns, we as a partnership want to hear that as well. So if there are individuals and if there are constituents or residents in your areas that are coming to you and saying, we'd like to report, but actually this is the experience that we've had when we've tried to raise it, then we are very much live to and want to understand where those responses are falling down and being less than what they should be. So we directly want to hear about those as well. So those are the avenues that quality assurance and the avenues are open for to raise concerns.
Some of the news reports have reported in some police departments for individuals, not all police in any way, shape, or form, were looking at porn and doing things like this and passing it around and making it a hostile workplace for female officers. The question is, how is that being improved and how is that being measured at all in any way, shape, or form?
So again, it's very unfortunate because Helen Kenny, who is the new LPA commander, standing in currently for Andy Cranage, wasn't able to join us on the call today, but it's a question that I can certainly pass on to Helen and ask for a written response from Thames Valley Police in respect of that for assurance for the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions from the committee? Shirley?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Yeah, just one question or an observation really. Under theft of vehicle here, we've got listed on the crime performance summary, and recently I've seen a lot on social media about keyless cars being stolen. There seems to be a real spate of this, and I just wonder, is the partnership putting out any advice to residents about how to keep their keyless cars safe, and you know, is the increase as much as we are being led to believe it is from social media? Is this a real problem?
The theft of vehicles for Wokingham is a problem. The theft of keyless cars is a national issue, and we haven't been untouched in Wokingham. So we do have some keyless cars, as has been commented earlier. We are a wealthy borough. We have money and technology, and those things are also going to be attractive for people and organised crime to criminals to come into the borough and alleviate residents of those things. So yes, we are putting out messages. We have a planned calendar of messages that goes out because we see these spikes at certain times and certain points of the year. But sometimes when there's an anomaly, such as there is at the moment in terms of keyless vehicles, just being a trend out of the blue, we put out messaging together with Thames Valley Police around keyless vehicles, and for residents to be aware that those vehicles are of particular being targeted. So yes, we do, and we are at the moment. Is it of as much of a concern as social media would lead you to believe? This is hard to sort of gauge really in terms of social media, but certainly for us historically, we've had on the borough some of the highest car ownership in the country. So, some households, I know more than 10-15 years ago were having on average 2.5 cars per household, when actually the national average was 1.5. How you have half a car, I don't know, but the statistics tell you. So we've got high car ownership, we've got high levels of affluence, and therefore we are also going to be a target in terms of organised criminals wanting to take those from residents. The thing I would add also is that we are at some of the lowest levels of theft from or theft of a car than we've have ever been on record. And that is generally down to the fact that most people are at home and looking after their vehicles because they're at home and they're not parked in a public space where they're most vulnerable. But additional information is going out to residents about how to keep their vehicles with additional security.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got, two questions, one from Al, one from myself.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, I've got just 3 points. You have a line saying family gold burglaries are a key identified trend in the borough. And this is something I speak to residents, is quite a big worry. Is this a priority of the police? And is there anything we can say to reassure residents about that? That's the first question. Now, the second one about bicycle thefts. E-bikes and things, very expensive bits of kit. I just wondered where in this chart that things like bikes stolen from stations, from outside the supermarket in the town centre, it doesn't seem to fall into any of these categories. And thirdly, I just wondered about the theft of vehicle. Does that include motorcycles and mopeds? Are they included in that, or are they classed as burglaries from sheds and garages because they're often just lifted into the back of a transit van or something? Okay, thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So the theft of motor vehicle, the theft of e-bikes and e-scooters can be a combination of places. So it will, because of the recording standards, it will depend, like you've identified there, if they're taken from a shed or from an outbuilding, then they will be recorded as theft from a non-dwelling place, theft from a shed, and will show in those figures. So they have to be trawled through in terms of identifying particular trends. Theft of bike for Wokingham was of a previous concern. Of recent times has been less of a concern, simply because I think we have increased the number of the amount of information and education around keeping your bike safe. We did at a particular time have some spate of high value bikes being stolen from sheds and garages, and also from railway stations and so on and so forth, as people were out and about on their bikes somewhat more. But that seems to have taken a massive dip, really, as police have cracked down on the numbers of people sort of selling these things on eBay and Gumtree and so on and so forth, and also people getting better with their security on bikes. As you say, they can be very expensive items. In relation to family gold thefts is a priority, but it is particularly difficult to tackle for a number of different reasons. One is family gold theft series will generally be linked to, if often or not always linked to, organised crime activity. So these organised criminals will have information to the street and the house where they are targeting. They'll have very good information about where, in particular in the house, so even where family gold is kept in, very well hidden, inconspicuous places. That seems to have made the information of organised criminals to know where to look. The other thing that's very difficult for family gold thefts in terms of tackling is the fact that the insurance companies replace the gold, and families, unfortunately, families take the gold back, and then it makes it back to the property, and then the circle sort of repeats itself. And organised criminals also know that it will be replaced by the insurance company come 12, 18 months, and therefore they will be targeted possibly on a repeat again. So it's a sort of a cycle of incidents that happens in terms of family gold. The advice or the advice or the reassurance is that very good information is being shared across borders and police forces in terms of tackling particular organised criminals who target family. Oh, and the other thing is in terms of taking the gold to a gold shop and having it melted down and then taking cash, there's almost no names or addresses or any proof of ownership needed in terms of turning that gold then into literally into liquid and then doing away with the cash. So there's a number of different things that are broken in that cycle that stop the sort of traditional cycle of offending to be addressed. The best thing people could do is probably not keep their gold at home, unfortunately, or not take it back from the insurance company and ask for, if you have gold, perhaps store it in a bank safety deposit box is the best way to avoid a family gold theft in your property. And the police, unfortunately, continue to play catch up because the organised criminals are always 2, 3, 4, 5 steps ahead of anything that we can do in terms of prevention of the issue.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, I've got one question here. It's sort of a high level question in terms, and it's probably one that you need to go away and come back with. I don't expect an answer right now. We've got a whole list of offences here, and we've got a reporting strategy saying so and so number of offences have occurred, but there's no kind of perspective value associated with those in terms of allowing us to know that we're attacking. Say we've got 13 cars being stolen, we've got hundreds of people being impacted by fraud. So actually going after the fraud is a more useful case than the car case. So you want to see how we're spending the time of our officers. Secondly is the prosecution rate, to see how that is going. Is that trending up, trending down, bearing in mind the stress that is on the legal system? So I think both of those are take it away things. Don't expect an answer right now.
Thank you, Chair. I'll take those away. So it's the prosecution rate, and also you're interested in sort of volumes of offences. So where's the volume crime?
Well, so it's more of the value to the community. So we know that, again, I'll point to Gregor's case. If we've got lots of fraud going on, that's going to have a high impact to both the people who are victims, but also to the families of those victims. Whereas someone's car being stolen it's a car that's been stolen and it gets replaced by insurance. So you can see where I'm coming from, I hope, in that there's a higher degree of concentration or value on the community family damaging ones. I'm not putting this very well in words, but I'm trying to see there has to be some sort of value in terms of the crime. So we're actually chasing after the right things.
Yeah, so the community impact, the overall community impact of one crime against another doesn't have the same value. I understand. So
Okay.
that is very longitudinal. I'll go away and do my best to try and provide some information for the committee on those two.
Thank you. Anybody else? No, I think we're done there. Thank you very much, Narinda, for your time here. Thank you.
Evening.
So moving on to the civil parking enforcement updates. Oh, is that Paul?
It is. It's me.
Okay.
And hopefully Andy
Andy.
will join me. Good evening, committee. I'd just like to highlight a few key areas in this report before we take any particular questions. As an introduction, this report provides an annual update to the civil parking enforcement operated by the Borough Council under the Traffic Management Act 2004 and is covering the period April 2021 to March 2022. So we're looking back on what's been achieved. So why is enforcement needed? It provides more efficient utilisation of car parking provision on and off street. This gives the turnover of vehicles. It reduces congestion and improves road safety, therefore tackling vehicles not parking where there are restrictions. And who carries out this enforcement? Well, the council contracted the enforcement and the back office work to NSL in 2017, and currently there are 8 trained civil parking enforcement officers, with 4 being trained, and they are shadowing the other officers and will be fully operative during August 2022. Officers receive a monthly report from NSL, and this is summarised in the report you've got this evening. There's a lot of data here, but indicating, for example, on page 40, the number of penalty charge notices issued each month for on-street and off-street, and also the time of day they're issued. On page 42, you've got penalty charge notices issued for each zone of the borough for each particular month. Page 43 indicates the types of penalty charge notices issued and warning notices for on-street and off-street. Page 45 indicates the schools that were visited each month, and schools are visited by the civil parking officers daily at AM drop-off time and PM pick-up time. Should also be noted that CCTV is planned to be operational at 2 schools from the end of September 2022, and this will be a really good trial of the type of technology that's coming forward. Page 46 indicates the off-street car parks, including country parks, where all revenue from those car parks contributes to the income of the country parks and ensures that they are self-sustainable service, requiring little or no contributions from the council. With growing demand for electric vehicles, there's 30 EV points which are currently operational in off-street car parks, and additional sites are being investigated, and they're shown on page 47. During 2022-23, the council is reviewing its parking management strategy for the borough. This sets out the council's high-level approach towards parking issues for consideration by the council's executive, and if agreed, this document will go out for full public consultation before adoption by the council. Following this, and in line with the strategy documents, any action plan will be developed and further policies and procedures put in place. So I hope that's given you a flavour of the report and open up for questions. Thank you, Chair.
Questions? Laura, Chris, Laura first of all.
Thank you. First of all, are there any specific TROs in place across the borough when it comes to pavement and verge parking? And then I've got a second question. You want to
Not-
answer that one first?
Not specifically for verge and pavement parking. If there are, for example, double yellow lines on the adjacent carriageway, then that enforcement can take place on the verge or the footway. However, if there is not any, there is no enforcement can take place. If it's obstruction of the footway itself, that is a police matter.
Thank you. And then second of all, how often is the strategy for the location of patrols looked at by yourselves? I mean, I've always had very good experiences when I've asked CP officers to come to local schools. I've got great feedback on them on that. But I just wonder, I'm not quite sure where they are most of the time, especially when it comes to schools which are spread out across the borough. So it would just be really useful to know from a scrutiny point of view, what is the maximum usefulness and impact for our residents for whatever location of patrol strategy they have?
Unless Andy tells me differently, these are reviewed constantly because it's targeting where there is enforcement needed. So they could be targeting a particular area, and then the numbers of PCN start to decline. Then they'll start to look at other areas where there are problems. So it is constantly being reviewed.
I suppose another one is just, how do they know where the problems are? Is it just down to residents and councillors reporting that to the service, and that's it really?
Shall I take that one?
Yes, you take that one, Andy.
Yes, Laura. So the service itself is self-managing. So as Paul said, they target every school every month, and I think every school nearly every week. But where they see a lack of non-compliance by parents, they then focus more on other schools and they just move on. Like you said, if there's a particular issue being brought up by parents or residents and they want us to focus on it, those requests come in and they'd simply passed on to NSL and they focus on those areas to address that non-compliance until it goes away, and then they move on.
Thank you.
Good evening, Paul and Andy. Page 38, we have the KPIs. There's no figures here, no targets. And I noticed nothing in this area came to the Overdue Scrutiny Management Committee last month. What's going to happen to these? How can we assess these?
Sorry, what page was that, Chris?
Page 38, the KPIs.
38.
A quick look. So do you want, is your question you'd like some more detail on these KPIs?
Well, there isn't any detail, there are no figures.
So these are operational KPIs by which we assess the effectiveness of the contractor. If you would like us to share those with you, we're more than happy to do so. They just weren't part of the actual CPE update that we normally give.
Well, I think you're saying it's at an operational level rather than the political level, but maybe yes. I'll leave that to you, Chairman. I'm sorry, the other point was, did I miss this? Has a policy decision been made on whether you're moving to moving traffic enforcement, which requires to apply for a designation order, I think?
Yeah, moving traffic enforcement is something which is being looked at the present time, and a business case is being evaluated with a submission to the DFT in January 2023.
A deadline for a submission if we decide to make one. Yeah.
But you have no policy, no approved policy in advance, in principle.
It would have to go through. There's a business case being considered, and it would have to go through that process before we did that submission to the DFT. So it would have to go through exec approval. You're right, Chris, but it hasn't as yet. No.
Okay, thank you.
One comment and one question. The comment is, I'm very surprised to see that there have been a total of 14 patrols at Floreat Montague Park Primary School. I say that because I walk my children to school every single day, and I have never once seen a parking enforcement officer there in the morning. And in the past, when I have asked if parking enforcement officers could come and be at the school, the response I've always had is that the road wasn't adopted, and so the parking enforcement wouldn't be viable. So I'm really looking forward to seeing how that changes going forward. The question that I have, though, is a couple of months ago, I happened to be on the receiving end of a parking fine in both Wokingham and in Reading on consecutive days. Both my fault, I'll be completely open and honest, both my fault. I did it and I paid the fines, and I paid them soon enough that I didn't have to pay the full fine. I paid the deducted fine, which is great. The parking fine in Reading is extremely more expensive than it is here in Wokingham. The parking fine in Reading, even if you pay within 14 days, I think is about £15 more expensive than here in Wokingham. If you don't, it is about £30 more expensive. Is there any plans, are there any thoughts about increasing our parking fines to bring them in line with neighbouring boroughs, and how do we compare with other boroughs in terms of fines?
I'm gonna, unless you want to answer that one, Paul, I'm gonna take that one. But my understanding, and Martin will correct me, is the actual level of fines is set by national guidance, not regulations. Yeah. I don't think it's at our discretion to raise it, and I think ours are already at the high level.
Yeah, that's my understanding as well. It's standard across the whole of the country under the Act, so it's legislation. So it may be where you were parking that there was a particular discretion by.
So for context, I was parked in Rose Street and I overstayed my welcome in the Rose Street car park, my own fault. And then the following day, I was parked on one of the roads near to Royal Berks Hospital, but a public road, not in the car park, on a public road near to Royal Berks Hospital. And the fine was significantly more expensive. I actually took pictures of both of them and sent them to Pauline Jorgensen and asked them, well, thanked her for us being cheaper, firstly. But secondly, I made the comment, why is it that theirs are more expensive than us?
Just to let you know, Greg, Martin's just confirmed to me that we actually went in at the medium level when we made our application to do CPE enforcement. We could go higher, but we'd need DFT approval. A further application to them.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry about that.
Shirley.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, a couple of things. You, Paul, you alluded quickly to the CCTV at schools, at school gates, which I'm very interested in because one of the schools in my ward was going to be one of the pilot scheme. I think was going to be a trial, and then it all got sidelined because of COVID. Is it just going to be a trial in one or two schools, or is it going to be rolled out through to all the schools where there are big problems with parking? And is Beechwood School, Ambleside Close, somewhere up there which is where it was before?
My understanding is that we've got 3 cameras which are going to go live in September, and they'll be targeted on 2 particular schools. We need to trial that to make sure that everything works, and from that particular point we can then move them around to other schools, and possibly a growth bid in the future. If everything goes very well, we can then expand that particular type of service.
Just to add to that, Shirley, Martin's confirmed that Beechwood is in the top 6 of schools where we're going to try and do some work at. I'm not saying it'll be done this year, but it is certainly on our agenda.
Oh, well, that's good news for my residents in that area. Thank you for that. And the other thing I was going to ask about was this, the contract. The contract has been renewed for further 2 + 2 years. And so it kind of occurs to me that, and we were talking about this earlier, that maybe when, this is something more general, but when contracts are up for renewal, would it not be sensible for the service to come before overview and scrutiny before the contract is renewed? Because you know, assuming we found something that we were sort of uneasy about within this report, and we've got another 4 years of the contract to run, there'd be very little we could do about it.
I mean, I think that we obviously in line with all the other constitutional requirements, but I'm guessing if we were going to re-procure it in a few years' time, we could bring those decisions, subject to them being a meeting in the right sort of time frame, so that we could actually do it quite timely fashion. But I don't see any problem with bringing the decision in, unless you do, Paul.
No, I don't at all. I think it's a very good idea to bring this to Overview and Scrutiny Committee to make sure what is been done in the past we want to continue with, and anything we need to change, we need to change.
Thank you. And I've just got one more point, which is about off-street parking, about our car parks. And we changed to 24-hour charging. That's not charging, but we changed to a 24-hour charging period last year. And that requires quite a lot of signage to be changed in our car parks. You know, that the ones that now have got 24-hour charging periods, the signs don't reflect that. And that got me looking at signs in car parks, and quite a lot of them are quite misleading and say different things. So, for example, Clockenwell Road car park in Woodley states that in one place it states no return parking, you can only park for limited time, no return within 24 hours. And on another place in the same car park, it says no return within 2 hours. So there is sort of a lot of signage that probably needs looking at. And I wonder if there is a plan afoot to review signage in our car parks and schedule in some kind of renewal of signage.
Do you want me to take that one, Paul?
Yeah, you take it, and I'll chip in with anything.
Yeah, I think, Shirley, you're right. There are some very old signs, and it's worth noting that when we were doing some of our work around Twyford parking management strategy, we noticed there were quite a few anomalies between the TRO restrictions and what was actually signed on the ground. And I suspect that's true with some of our car park signs. And we're currently reviewing those signs to make sure they are in line with the most up-to-date TROs.
Thank you, that's good. And in terms of just in terms of Waitrose car park or Clockenwell Road car park, it would be very helpful if it wasn't no return in 24 hours, because I got a lot of complaints of residents who take their dog to the vet in the morning and then want to park to pick their dog up from the vet in the afternoon. And strictly speaking, they're breaking the rules if they do so.
Yeah. No, I remember that one.
Yeah, thank you.
Oh, Laura, you beat me to it.
Cheeky, one more question. Thank you, Chair. So on page 42, on the graph that has all the PCNs 21 to 22, Wokingham Town has far more PCNs than Early and Woodley. And I know Wokingham's more populous than both the other towns, but it seems to be that on average there's between 6 to 10 times more PCNs a month in Wokingham Town. And is that purely based on there being so many more traffic restrictions, 6 to 10 times more in Wokingham Town than Early and Woodley?
I suspect it's because we simply have more car parks in Wokingham Town than we do in Woodley and Early. Certainly Early has virtually no car parking, public car parking to speak of. So I suspect it's just around the volume of car parking. Yeah. Martin's saying that, and a higher propensity for violations in Wokingham Town Centre, but
that's exactly what I was going to say.
Good. We're on the same message, Paul.
Okay, it's Pete here. I've got some questions here. Just first one really is on the EV charging ones. Do we have usage data for the EV charging points? And do we have any anticipated what the usage data is going to be? And how many requests have we had from residents to have EV points outside in their outside of their houses? That's the first set of questions. Next one, with regards to TROs, is I know some residents have asked for TROs restrictions in areas, but have had very kind of poor response. So I just wondered, do you measure your responses to residents to say we're going to reply in 28 days, say, or something, some sort of data? The next one really is picking up on Gregor's point about the schools. Looking at the data you've presented here, it does seem to be fairly weighted in terms of the town centre schools, as opposed to the more spread out schools. And I know in particular ones, Floriat is a big concern of mine, and I do receive a lot of complaints about that area, but no engagement with the team in that. And again, you know, I've sent photos with that, so I've not seen any car parking wardens there, no sort of restrictions on parents or telling parents don't do this. So it seems that there should be some spread out from the town centre.
Do you want me to? I'll take these ones, Paul. They're a bit more special. Let's go backwards. Floriat School, obviously we couldn't enforce before the road was adopted. The other side of it is you've got to remember with enforcing outside schools, it's not the job of the CPE officials to talk to parents and say you shouldn't be doing that. It's to give out tickets if they don't comply with the restrictions in place. Now, the restrictions in place and school zigzags are an immediate offence, which means if you get someone parked there, they get a ticket immediately. As Paul will no doubt tell us as well, if you're parked on double yellow lines, you're allowed to load and unload. And the problem is that at school times, it's very difficult, certainly at dropping off time, to catch parents on the double yellow lines long enough to actually issue a PCN. It's a bit easier at school pickup time because just because people tend to turn up a bit early and wait for their kids to saunter out at their usual pace, as I seem to remember, which was very slow with their friends. And then there is more opportunity to give out PCNs for people parking on double yellow lines. What I would say in terms of the distribution, they're not focused on town centre schools per se. They do every single school. If you think we have a particular problem, Peter, just raise it with the team, put the request through, and we'll make sure that the contractor focuses on Floriat for a while. And let's see how many times, and they will focus on it until, as we said before, the non-compliance goes down. EV charging, it's a bit off topic for this one. We will have data because the machines that we use for charging will generate that data. If you want to just send me an email, I'll try and get the data for you. It's fine, there's no problem at all. TRO responses, traffic regulation orders in Wokingham are batched up in what's called borough-wide amendments. So in order to move them forward, we normally have about maybe 30 or 40 different amendments to restrictions across the borough, all batched up in one sort of order that we put through. Now that can, whilst it makes it more efficient in terms of administering that service, it can make it a bit long-winded for any individual set of measures, and that process typically takes around 6 months. Now we are currently in Highways and Transport building what's called a CRM system, which is around customer relationship management. First phase of it will handle general inquiries, but the intention is to try and put some of these processes onto that system so that we start generating automated updates for the customers, which is a bit more, as you say, customer friendly, and make sure that people are aware that we are still working on things. Sometimes when we work on at the moment, we are silent on it because we're still considering stuff and assessing stuff.
Just on the EV charging, if you could get that information, Andy, and send it to Callum, and then he could send it out to the whole of the committee.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else questions? No. Okay. Thank you, Andy and Paul. So we'll move. Sorry. Okay, we now move on to Andy and Paul for the LC Whip. Thank you for coming along to talk about this.
Another double act. Yeah, so since I took over the role as executive member for Active Travel, Transport and Highways, I wanted the local cycle and walking infrastructure plan to be a high priority to go out to public consultation on the primary route network following the previous consultation of July 2021. It's very important to have an LC whip as Active Travel England will be asking for evidence of this and requesting bids for funding. So we need to be ready and have schemes prioritised that are feasible and deliver the greatest benefits. The next phase of the consultation commences on the 11th of July and runs for 6 weeks. I did want it really to start from today, but it wasn't feasible because there was far too much work to be done and get all the documents into a usable format for consultation. The programme indicates that the LC whip will be completed by the middle of October 2022 with a report. And I think it'd be very helpful if this was brought back to this committee at its November meeting on the 3rd. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Anybody got any questions? Yes, David and Laura.
Chair, thank you. I note that the project started at inception on or about the 6th of January 21, and that if we're lucky, we're going to get something to review and consult on by the end of October. I think the project team have successfully avoided any charge of reckless haste. It would be good to actually see some metrics here about delivery. When actually will we see the first square foot of cycleway, footpath or anything else come into being as a result of this project? And indeed, when we see the plan delivered in full. I think that, to me, I have little faith in, and I have been involved in this process as part of the liaison with Finchampton Parish Council early on. When we had our first consultation meeting, we thought the best possible date for anything to actually happen could be within 5 years. I find that quite depressing, considering that active travel is a priority within the borough. So could you please include some dates for actual delivery of infrastructure on the ground in that project plan? And secondly, all of those who've been involved in this debate will know where some of the key problems are. If you live in the southern part of the borough and you want to travel to the town centre, we all know the issue with the railway bridges on the Finchampton Road or getting mangled on the level crossing on Barkham Road, and that another, whatever this plan says, it will say that another safe crossing of the railway line is required. And I don't think we need to wait for the completion of this project to actually deliver that. So it'd be good to see noted in the project plan some particular items that we know we're going to have to deliver, whatever the final shape of the plan, and a timetable for delivery of those as well. Thank you.
As I said, David, it's a high priority of mine to actually move forward with this. July 2021 was the last consultation. We need to get this in place because of Active Travel England. We need to have an LC whip. We need to show that evidence that we've got that. We need to have our priorities in place, and that report will be ready for the middle of October. And then it can be brought back to CCOS. In response to your first bit of square meterage of active travel routes LCN 120 compliant, the borough has been awarded funding for the Woodley to Reading route, and that is what we will be consulting on from the 11th of July on the section which originally went out for consultation earlier this year in February, where it was a one-way system for traffic which was proposed. That drew over 1,200 objections to it. That's been reviewed. I've held a workshop with ward members and the 2 town councils, and a particular option has really been the best one been put forward, which we would like to go out to consultation on the 11th of July. There's a few bits that are being tweaked at the moment from comments which have come back from that. That funding, part of it has got to be spent this financial year, and there are sections that could be done this year, which is the first phases that we'd like to do. And this financial year will be the first part of a compliant LTM 120, which we'll see on the ground between Woodley and Reading.
Could I just come back on that? Yeah, Paul, I appreciate that. Thank you. And that's good news. But I think in terms of the wider LC whip, and I appreciate the challenges in terms of funding and consultation and so on, but it would be good to have some sense in this timetable going forward, if only on percentage of delivery, that it will be 20% delivered by the end of 2023, 50% by the end of 2024, or whatever you deem realistic. But it would be great, I think, for this committee and into the future for people to be able to measure in terms of delivery, not just in terms of process.
We will be reliant on funding from outside and bids to Active Travel England, but we need to have our schemes lined up and the priorities that we want, and they need to be ready to go, and that's how we're going to actually deliver a LC whip on the ground.
Before I go with you, Laura, we've got Adrian Betteridge from the Wokingham Active Travel, who is here. I'd asked him along as a guest to actually give his comment from a community point of view on the LC whip, so we get to hear from an active cyclist.
Hello, Pete. Can you hear me, everybody?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much for the opportunity to say a few words this evening. We have been, I'm a representative of a local active travel campaign group. We have been very closely involved in the development of the LC whip from when it started back in January 2021. What we've contributed, I think, has been listened to and taken on board, both in terms of help with local knowledge on routes and options for routes, but also in terms of how this is positioned with the general public, which I think is probably the next biggest challenge. I think the most important issue for the consultation is selling to the people we're consulting with why we're doing this, because many people will look at this and see a lot of cost, which obviously means other things won't get done. And they'll also potentially see short-term disruption whilst work is being done. And in some cases, they will notice that road space currently available to cars will be given up to walking and cycling. So the potential for objection, I think, is very strong here. And it's really important that the reasons for doing this are clear to everybody. And in short, they are climate change, air quality, health and well-being, and congestion. And doing this well potentially makes a significant contribution to solving all of those problems. If we don't do that, then we'll find, I imagine, what we saw with the Woodley consultation. Lots of people focus on the disruption and don't really understand or get to grips with the benefits. So that's my biggest concern. The route planning, I think, that's been done is good. The ambition is good, but selling it is going to be really important. Assuming we do sell it, then of course a plan is more than just a network plan. Ultimately, as has been already mentioned this evening, it needs to include a prioritization of all of these routes. The funding sources need to be identified, whether they're external or internal, and a timetable needs to be attached to it. And the clock is ticking on this. The Climate Emergency Action Plan says we're going to have 5 times as much cycling in the borough by 2030. That's not going to happen if we don't get on with this from a funding and implementation point of view. So in summary, we have been very involved. We're very supportive of the detail that's going out to consultation. Haven't seen the final version yet, but I've seen enough of it to know that I think it stands up. It does need to be sold, and then it needs to be delivered. And if all that happens, we will be very happy. Thank you.
Thank you, Adrian. What I'll do, I'll go to Laura for questions and then we'll take it from there.
Thank you. It's good to know that the Woodley residents will be consulted from the 11th of July. When will that proposed consultation and wording be shared with Woodley councillors so we know what our residents are getting and what the proposal is going to be?
Very, very shortly, Laura. It's being developed at the moment.
So before the weekend?
That's the plan.
Okay, brilliant. And I know, Paul, you were looking at the parking spaces that are looked to be got rid of in my ward, and they are used by low-income elderly residents, so I can't support it at the moment. But I know that you're asking officers to have a look at how those parking places could be saved. I wondered if you'd moved on from that.
They are still being investigated, Laura.
But we'll know the answer before the weekend.
We'll have a plan before the weekend on what's going to go out.
Okay, thank you, Paul. And then just finally, I'll be honest, I don't really know what the LC whip is, what it says. I mean, the paper that we've got here doesn't really give much away. So just when it does come back, it would be nice to know what it says in the LC whip and what the draft proposals are.
It's basically a local cycling, walking and infrastructure plan, and it is looking forward to what is going to be introduced on the ground for walking and cycling as infrastructure. So you develop routes and what you are going to do with those routes, and you break them down into a primary route, a secondary route and a tertiary route.
And that plan hasn't been drafted yet?
That plan went out originally for consultation last year, and residents fed back information that has now been analysed, and that's what's now been pulled together to go out for the 11th with comments on it, on what we'd like to do on those particular routes.
Okay, thank you.
Shirley.
Thank you. Just a quick question. I understand there's another consultation going on, which also affects Woodley, about a cycle route from Loddon Park to Twyford Station. Somebody came and spoke, I believe, at Woodley Town Council a week or two ago, and was talking about this, but it was the first I'd heard of it. Is that part of the LC whip?
That is a levelling up fund bid, which we are putting in from Charville to Twyford Station. And I think that's, and it's also included within the LC whip. I've written to Theresa May, MP, and she has written a letter of support for it as well. And there is a number of residents, I understand, of getting a petition together to also support this particular route.
Okay, but you're saying it's just from Charville to Twyford Station. I just wonder why Woodley Town Council was involved in that case.
It's a long, just to correct point, it does link to Charville, but it actually links to Woodley. Shirley, it's a long held aspiration of the councils that goes back about 20 years to have a cross valley route that links Woodley to Twyford Station, and it goes through Charville Country Park, as Paul correctly, so it does link Charville to Twyford, but it also links to Woodley.
Right, yeah.
It is part of the LC whip, but an opportunity came up for a levelling up fund bid, and our original bid we'd already started construction on, so we decided to go for this one. It's a bit speculative, but if you don't put in, you don't get. So this seemed like the next best option.
Okay, thank you. So it hopefully will connect Loddon Park to this cycle. It occurs to me that it would be
Where's Loddon Park, Shirley?
Loddon Park is the new development on Sanford Farm.
Oh, sorry, yes.
And it occurs to me that if you're getting a cycle route from that area of Woodley, which is going to go to Twyford, it would naturally be very, very useful for students going to Wangel School. because it would take students from children from that area to Wangel's school, and it may well be that that could be something that was a benefit to that particular scheme, and I don't know whether it's been thought about. But if you were using, without going into too much detail, if you were going from Loddon Park along Beggars Hill Lane through under the railway bridge to Charville, you just turn left and you've got the school. So it's
yeah, no. So the actual route goes from the bottom of the Wangel School Road and straight across the valley there, parallel to the railway line.
right.
So it involves two bridges over the two arms of the River Loddon and into the back of Twyford Station car park.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
I've got a question here with regards to the consultation. I know in the past there seemed to be lacking consultation with the schools in terms of actually talking to them to get the view from the parents and from pupils. So that's feedback I've received from some of the schools. So it'd be useful to make sure that you do engage with them there. That's more of a comment than a question.
Thank you, Peter.
Yeah, we ensure that that happens.
What action do we have from this? So the action really is Laura's point about plan for coming this weekend.
Yeah, I think that's more a specific.
Yeah, I'm just making sure,
Yeah.
just note it down. We're going to get back to us on the November 3rd. You'd like to be on the meeting there. Okay. Yeah, I think that was it really. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just one point, Chair, just to let you know, I've put the answer to Rochelle's earlier question about public transport funding in the chat for the minutes, if you want to just pass that on.
Thank you. Okay, I guess we're done with the LC whip there. So thank you, Paul, Andy and Adrian.
Thank you.
Okay.
Right, so the next agenda item is the work programme. So we have on the 5th of September, 4 items there: enforcement and safety service update, bus strategy, mid-year budgetary position, and consider the work programme. So that's essentially this bit. I know we talked about the bus strategy, thinking of trying to get that to come earlier. So can we take that away and actually see if we can get some sort of wrangling with that?
Yeah, I think, let me go away and speak with officers. I'll speak with Steve directly and I will understand exactly what is and isn't possible to come to scrutiny. If the answer is even a slightly wavering, we might be able to bring something, then I'll liaise with the chair and if necessary, we'll organise a meeting as soon as possible, if that's what is appropriate.
Yeah, I think that's useful. Do we feel like do you feel confident that you'd know what to tell Steve that we're looking for if he asks that question exactly?
I'm always happy to have more input from members. So if you've got some specific points, then I'm happy to note them down.
I mean,
or you can send them to me via email. It's if you don't have them off the top of your head.
I mean, it's just specifically what he raised last time of the Department for Transport funding come to an end in September and how that gap is going to be plugged and what the options Rebecca and Steve could put to us are. So we actually have a full picture of what that impact would look like for residents and what the options to remedy it is. I think that's at the core. I don't know if anyone else has got anything else to contribute to that.
A very good starting point.
Yeah,
I definitely beyond that.
Mm-hmm.
Is there anything else worthy of note for the 5th of September meeting?
Not from me.
Okay. So we've got down on the 19th of September, an extraordinary meeting to receive progress reports on local plan update. That was agreed at the last overview of Scrutiny Management Committee to come along. So that is coming to this committee. We have several members here who are very interested in that. Any comment on that? Yeah.
That's the intention at the moment, just because it is such a big and important item. But if there is another item that members wish to sort of discuss as a matter of urgency, then I can speak with the chair and schedule that.
As I referenced earlier, I would very much appreciate seeing what action has been taken to combat fraud across our community. The run up to Christmas is a big peak time for fraud, particularly cyber fraud. Anybody that fills out the "what is your elf name," typically it's password harvesting. So they are actually trying to just find out things like what your mother's maiden name was, what your first pet's name was, because they are the things that are most likely to be your passwords. So in the run up to the Christmas period, I think it'd be worth reviewing what our strategy is to combat fraud.
Were you suggesting that that meeting might be appropriate for that as sort of a time frame? The September
Well, I mean,
meeting.
it would give until September. You know, from what Narinda was saying, that there is a plan, there is a strategy. I'd just like to see what it is. I don't think it's necessarily going to be a particularly long agenda item. I do get that the local plan update is going to be a meaty agenda item. What I would suggest is perhaps we put the fraud action item on first, and give it half an hour, and then we move into the local plan update for however long that takes.
I will liaise with Narinda, and hopefully we can organise maybe someone from Action Fraud as well to come along if she's got a contact.
Okay, yep. Yeah, I'm just concerned about the amount of time it will take, but if we do restrict it to half an hour, then. Uh, 3rd of October.
Just before. Just obviously you're noting the medium-term financial plan. I'm sorry, I didn't expand the acronym for those new members. That's what MTFP stands for. Prior to beginning that sort of extended period of scrutiny, we will be organising, as we do every year, a budget scrutiny training session. We'll invite all members to it. We're just in the process of speaking with the trainers to put on a session. So once I have the details, I will circulate it to members, and it will be open to all members.
Thank you. So we've got 3rd of November, which coincides with the LC whip piece. So that means we would be putting that on.
Yes, I was going to raise that. The medium-term financial plan item will be for that one of the heavier ones, because last year was when we looked at both the capital and revenue budgets sort of in one bigger block. It does then concern me that we have another 3 business items as such on that agenda. So I don't know whether it is. Oh, Shirley's got her hand up, Chair. No, you. Sorry.
I just wonder whether we need another domestic abuse update quite so soon after the one very extensive one we had at the last meeting. We also touched on it briefly today. I'm not sure.
I think that was because at the last meeting there were a lot of gaps, and this was just to plug it all in, or the KPIs and things. So it was just a briefer update, but with the information that we asked for.
All right. Okay. So if it's quite a.
Yes, it was just looking at the last minutes. It was specifically looking at the KPIs and instances of where within the borough most instances of domestic abuse were taking place. So I think it was sort of those specific. So it won't be as detailed as last time. But I think that was I think members were quite keen on that at the last meeting.
Sorry.
So I suppose we then move on to, do we need a second meeting in November? Potentially, because I think the LC whip item will be quite heavy, and the medium-term financial plan will also be heavy. And then you've also got a smaller update in the sense of the domestic abuse, and then the arts and culture one will sort of be a medium item, I would have thought. So you would be definitely pushing it to consider all of those properly in one session.
The big gap I'm seeing we've got here is about refugee status, and I am actually feeling we should squeeze that one in just to see where we are with refugees. not just the Ukrainians, but the Syrians, Afghan refugees. I think there is a bubbling problem, bearing in mind I have seen some police reports of issues.
I believe that at the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee, they agreed to consider that this year. So I believe that's on their work programme, to my knowledge.
Okay, well, find out if it is. If it isn't, then it'd be quite neat to, if we're going to have an extra meeting in November, we marry it with the LC whip.
It's currently on for the management committee in September. We can discuss it Thursday evening.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, so I am feeling that we do want the LC whip to come along. So, Gregor.
Chair, can I propose that we put in an additional meeting in November to consider first the arts and culture strategy and secondly the LC whip? If the LC whip is going to be a bigger agenda item, then I think absolutely we should give it the due consideration that it's due. The MTFP is also going to be a large item that needs to be discussed in detail. So I would suggest splitting the November 3rd meeting, doing domestic abuse update first and then the MTFP, and then in an additional meeting, the arts and culture strategy. Let's do that, give it its consideration and then put it to one side and then dedicate the time that's required to the LC whip.
Do I have a seconder for that proposal? Should we take a vote? Date to be arranged?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, vote. Yeah. Let's carry the vote. Which is the end of that agenda item. Couple of things that I wanted to bring up. Sorry.
On the official, on the meeting or not?
It's part of the meeting. We're all here,
Yep.
so yes, it should be minuted.
Yeah, fine.
So I did mute via email about pre-meetings. We did hold a pre-meeting tonight, which personally I found useful, and the training that we're given for overview and scrutiny did suggest that we have pre-meetings. The idea is so we can actually get our questions together and actually formulate a plan of how we're going to do the questioning. So we did do that with 5 of us this evening. It made sure we didn't have duplication of questions. And also if you have asked a question, then actually that leads to this subsequent question. So we could chain questions together rather than dot them around. And I think that would make it much more easier for officers to answer a question. So really what I'm looking for is really, as a group, is how do we want to handle this? Personally, I suggested doing it on a Thursday via Teams or whatever, just because that gives us time to discuss the agenda, get the questions amongst ourselves, gives us 3 days to get some questions together and also possibly send them to the officers in time. So we actually get answers beforehand. And I think that would be invaluable. But I also recognise do it before the meeting. So really, I'm looking for advice from this committee to see what your preferred approach would be and take it from there. So open the table to discussion.
I'll be honest, I don't think I can probably spare the time to do another meeting, unfortunately.
Okay, that's fair enough. It's not mandatory at all by any means.
Is this the officers' request or is it just the committee's request about the sending the question in advance to them?
It's really just for our benefit to make sure that we scrutinise correctly and we don't effectively waste time. And also, as I say, we try to chain the questions together. So if we sit together and we know that so-and-so says, I've got this question, you've got that question, okay, let's marry them together so we get those questions out straight away. So the officers don't have to keep jumping to and fro. Because at the moment, what we're doing is one person's asking a whole stream of questions, varied topic, and then another person's asking another stream of questions, varied topic. Whereas it'd be nice to have, okay, let's just do that one topic in one instance. And that's all I'm trying to get together, put together.
If it was down to a personal preference, I'd rather do it before the meeting rather than have a meeting 3 or 4 days earlier, simply for diary management. I appreciate there's no British choice, but that to me would be easier.
So I tend to read my papers over the course of the weekend, so my ability to do it on the Thursday before is negligible. I also have two small children that I need to help put to bed, so I wasn't able to join you today, even though I did arrive sort of 10-15 minutes after you began. I am more than happy to pass my questions to a member of the group and have them ordered accordingly, and then be referred to which question somebody wants to ask or whatever, and I'm quite happy for them to be asked by other people, so that we can actually spend the time listening to what's being said to us and asking questions about what's being said, as opposed to necessarily just asking questions about what's in the pack.
Chris?
As we have three members of this committee missing today, it'd perhaps be a good idea to ask them rather than asking me, as I probably won't be here that often.
That's fine. I'll take the action to speak to those three members. Okay. Anybody else? I'm generally feeling from the room, do it before the meeting, and if you can't make the meeting, just drop an email and we'll take it from there. Okay. The next one was Laura's question about names associated with questions to the officers.
Yeah, if I get some context on this, I suppose, Laura, what it's all about is it's being consistent between the 4 overview and scrutiny committees. So what we don't want is, for example, this committee not naming members and the other 3 naming them, or vice versa. So that decision was then made last year at management to sort of standardise it all and to have a similar sort of writing style. If members would prefer that to change, then I see no problem with that. But I would again suggest strongly that it's the same over all 4 committees, which is why it would probably be best to go to the management committee to have them to consider that again and to consider sort of the benefits of naming members or not naming members.
I think it's ultimately quite a low level issue, and considering what we've just discussed of swapping questions and bunching questions, I think it probably is fine how it is. But yeah, I didn't know it changed, so it's good to get the background. Thank you, Callum.
Okay, I think that was it. Yep. Okay, well, thank you for coming to this meeting. Hope it was useful. I'm always open to feedback from anybody in terms of running the meetings to make them more productive, and from a chair's perspective, I want to do a good job. So thank you. All right. Good night.